To everyone at the Oak Creek Family Clinic, Abigail Cole was just the quiet triage nurse who flinched whenever the front door slammed. They thought she was fragile, a timid wallflower hiding behind oversized scrubs. They had no idea she was a Tier 1 naval sniper, and when a heavily armed hit squad breached the lobby, they were the ones who became the prey. The fluorescent lights of the Oak Creek Family Clinic flickered with an irritating, incessant hum. It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon in suburban Washington state, the kind of day where the rain slammed against the glass in relentless gray sheets, keeping the waiting room mostly empty. Abigail Cole stood by the triage station, meticulously counting a fresh shipment of tongue depressors. She was a small woman, standing no taller than 5'4", with pale blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and glasses that constantly slipped down the bridge of her nose. When someone spoke to her, she usually kept her eyes trained on the floor, her voice rarely rising above a whisper. "Abby, for heaven's sake, are you still counting those?" The sharp nasal voice belonged to Brenda Higgins, the clinic's head nurse. Brenda was a woman who wielded her seniority like a blunt instrument, constantly micromanaging the staff and reserving a special patronizing tone for Abigail. Abigail physically flinched, her shoulders dropping inward, a textbook display of submissive body language. "Sorry, Brenda. Just making sure the inventory matches the manifest." "Well, hurry it up. Dr. Wright needs exam room 2 prepped for the Miller consultation, and you're moving like molasses," Brenda snapped, turning on her heel and marching back down the corridor. Abigail watched her go. Beneath the oversized navy blue scrubs, her resting heart rate sat at a steady, frigid 45 beats per minute. The flinch, the dropped shoulders, the stutter, it was all muscle memory, but not the kind Brenda thought it was. It was a carefully constructed camouflage. Before she was Timid Abby, she was Chief Petty Officer A. Cole. Officially, the United States Navy SEALs did not integrate women into their sniper teams. Unofficially, JSOC maintained a highly classified off-the-books detachment known as Echo Element. They needed operators who could walk into hostile environments without triggering a second glance. Abigail had spent 6 years in the shadows of the Hindu Kush, the Horn of Africa, and the violent borderlands of Eastern Europe, looking through the scope of a suppressed Mark 13 Mod 7 sniper rifle. She was a ghost. She was lethal, but a mission gone catastrophically wrong in Damascus had forced her into the wind. She had traded the adrenaline and the blood for the scent of rubbing alcohol and the quiet monotony of a suburban clinic. The timid nurse persona wasn't just an act. It was a survival mechanism to keep her hypervigilance from looking like aggression. A sharp chime from the front door pulled her from her thoughts. A man walked in, shaking the rain from his dark trench coat. It was David Miller, the 3 p.m. appointment. On paper, David was a regional manager for a logistics company, but Abigail's eyes didn't read paper, they read behavior. Miller's eyes darted to the exits. He didn't casually walk to the reception desk. He moved with a deliberate tactical awareness, keeping his back to the solid brick wall. His right hand hovered unconsciously near his waistband. More importantly, Abigail noticed the faint, crude outline of a specific ink pattern peeking out from his collar, a Bratva insignia poorly laser removed. Miller wasn't logistics. He was a defector, or a witness, and he was terrified. "Mr. Miller," Abigail said softly, walking over with a clipboard, her eyes aimed at his chin. "Dr. Wright is ready for you in room 2. If you'll just follow me." Miller grunted, following her down the narrow linoleum hallway. As they passed the large front windows, Abigail's peripheral vision caught something out of place. A black Chevrolet Suburban was idling across the street, partially obscured by the heavy rain. Its engine was running exhaust pluming in the cold air, but its headlights were off. Washington plates. rental fleet sticker on the windshield. Abigail logged the license plate in her memory instantly. JHK 8912. She ushered Miller into exam room. 2 took his blood pressure, which was dangerously high, and quietly slipped out, closing the door behind her. As she walked back toward the nurse's station, a strange prickle crawled up the back of her neck. It was a sensation she hadn't felt since a dusty rooftop in Kandahar. Her senses heightened. The annoying hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded crystalline. The smell of damp wool ozone and impending violence hung heavy in the air. She stopped by the heavy steel doors of the supply room just out of sight of the main lobby and waited. The front doors of the clinic didn't chime this time. They were kicked open with a shattering crash of glass. The sound of the breach echoed through the quiet clinic like a bomb going off. Brenda screamed, dropping a tray of metal instruments that clattered loudly across the linoleum. Dr. Wright, who had just stepped out of his office, froze in his tracks. 4 men poured into the lobby. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. They weren't street thugs. They wore heavy waterproof tactical jackets, but Abigail's trained eyes immediately recognized the rigid, bulky outlines beneath the fabric, level 3 Kevlar body armor. Each man carried a suppressed weapon. The point man, a towering brute with a scarred jaw, wielded a short-barreled Brugger and Tomet APC-9 submachine gun. The others carried suppressed FN-57 pistols weapons designed specifically to penetrate body armor. Nobody moves. Nobody makes a sound. The point man Victor barked in a thick, unidentifiable Eastern European accent. He leveled his submachine gun at the terrified receptionist, who immediately dropped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Wright, trying to find his courage, raised his hands. "Listen, we have narcotics in the back. Just take whatever you want and leave." Victor stepped forward and slammed the butt of his weapon into the doctor's jaw. The older man crumpled to the floor, blood pooling on the pristine white tiles. Brenda shrieked hysterically until the second gunman grabbed her by the hair, pressing the hot suppressor of his pistol against her cheek. "Where is Miller?" Victor demanded, his voice dangerously calm over the screaming. "The man who just walked in. Room number, now!" From her blind spot near the supply room, Abigail watched the reflection of the lobby in a convex safety mirror mounted on the ceiling. Her breath hitched, then immediately slowed. The timid, stuttering nurse evaporated. Her posture straightened the artificial slump of her shoulders, disappearing to reveal the coiled athletic tension beneath. Her heart rate, which should have been skyrocketing in a state of panic, settled back into a dead calm sniper's rhythm. 40 beats per minute. She ran a rapid tactical assessment. 4 tangos, heavily armed, armored, and experienced. They had controlled the fatal funnel of the entrance and dominated the room in seconds. They had earpieces they were communicating on a closed radio net, which meant there was likely a 5th man outside in the Suburban, acting as a driver and lookout. If they found Miller, they would execute him. And because this was a professional hit squad operating on foreign soil, they wouldn't leave witnesses. Every single person in the clinic was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Victor nodded to one of the flankers, a wiry man with dead eyes. "Clear the back hallway. Find the rooms. If anyone is back there, silence them." The wiry gunman nodded, raising his suppressed pistol, and began walking down the corridor, his boots squeaking faintly on the wet linoleum. Abigail slipped silently into the darkened supply room, leaving the door cracked just a fraction of an inch. She didn't have a rifle. She didn't have Kevlar. She was armed with nothing but a pair of trauma shears and her bare hands. She controlled her breathing, drawing oxygen deep into her diaphragm. She listened to the approaching footsteps. Squeak, step, squeak, step. He was moving confidently, weapon leading the way, expecting to find cowering doctors and weeping nurses. He walked past the supply room door, his attention focused on exam room 1 ahead of him. It was a fatal mistake. Abigail exploded from the shadows with terrifying silence. She didn't scream or hesitate. She moved with fluid, lethal geometry. Her left hand shot out, grabbing the slide of his FN-57 pistol simultaneously, pushing it away from her body and jamming the action so the weapon couldn't cycle. At the exact same microsecond, her right hand, gripping the heavy steel trauma shears like a karambit knife, struck upward. She drove the blunt steel edge of the shears precisely into the brachial plexus nerve cluster on the side of his neck. The gunman's eyes widened in shock as his entire right side instantly paralyzed. Before he could draw breath to yell, Abigail swept his lead leg, dragging him backward into the darkness of the supply room. As he fell, she wrapped her forearm around his throat in a flawless, bone-crushing rear naked choke. He thrashed wildly, but Abigail's leverage was perfect. She locked her grip, applying immense pressure to the carotid arteries. Within 6 seconds, his struggles weakened. At 10 seconds, his eyes rolled back. At 12 seconds, his body went completely limp. She lowered him gently to the floor, ensuring not a single piece of his gear clattered against the tiles. She worked quickly, her hands a blur in the dim light. She stripped the earpiece from his ear and fitted it into her own. She picked up his suppressed FN-57, checking the chamber and the magazine with a satisfying, almost silent click. 20 rounds of armor-piercing, 5.7 by 28mm ammunition. A voice crackled in her ear. "Gregory, report. You have the rooms." It was Victor. Abigail stood up in the dark, feeling the familiar cold weight of a weapon in her hands. The smell of antiseptic in her nose was replaced by the phantom scent of desert dust and gun oil. She tapped the transmit button on the stolen radio twice. Click, click. "Copy." Victor's voice came back. "Move fast. Cops will be here in 5. Abigail stepped over the unconscious body of the hitman. She checked the hallway. It was clear. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a ghost, and she was going to hunt them down one by one. The radio in Abigail's ear buzzed with a sharp burst of static. "Gregory status. Did you find the accountant?" Victor's voice was tighter now, stripped of its earlier arrogant drawl. Silence stretched over the frequency. "Gregory, respond." Abigail stood perfectly still in the shadowed supply room, the stolen FN-57 pistol resting comfortably in her grip. The weapon felt like an extension of her own arm, its polymer frame familiar and cold. She knew exactly what was happening in the lobby. Victor's tactical calculus was shifting. He was realizing the environment was no longer fully under his control. "Luca," Victor commanded over the net. "Go find him, check the back rooms, shoot anyone you see." Abigail slipped out of the supply room, moving with a fluid heel-to-toe gait that made absolutely zero sound on the linoleum. She bypassed exam room 2, where David Miller was presumably barricaded, and glided toward the clinic's radiology wing. The layout of the Oak Creek Family Clinic was etched into her mind. The squeaky floorboard near the water cooler, the blind spot created by the corner mirror, the heavy, lead-lined door of the X-ray room. She opened the door to the X-ray suite and slipped inside, leaving it ajar just enough to cast a thin sliver of light into the dark hallway. Footsteps approached. Heavy, tactical boots. Luca wasn't moving with Gregory's overconfident swagger. He was piecing the corners, weapon raised, sweeping his muzzle across every open doorway. From the pitch-black interior of the X-ray room, Abigail watched him through the narrow gap. Luca was a mountain of a man, his body armor stretched tight across a broad chest. His laser sight cut a sharp red line through the dusty air of the corridor. As he neared the supply room, he saw Gregory's legs sticking out from the shadows. Luca froze. He didn't rush to his fallen comrade, a rookie mistake. Instead, he immediately dropped into a crouch, sweeping his pistol toward the darkness, his finger tightening on the trigger. He reached up to tap his earpiece. "Victor, Gregory is down. I repeat, Gregory is—" Abigail didn't give him the chance to finish. She knew the FN-57 fired a high-velocity, lightweight bullet designed to punch through Kevlar, but it had a tendency to over-penetrate or deflect on hard angles. She needed a clean, unobstructed shot. Instead of stepping into the doorway, she raised the pistol and aimed straight at the drywall separating the X-ray room from the hallway. She had memorized the clinic's blueprints 3 years ago. It was standard half-inch gypsum board, no studs in this exact 12-inch gap. She visualized the geometry of the hallway. She calculated Luca's crouched height, the distance from the doorframe, the angle of his neck above the trauma plate of his body armor. It was an impossible shot for anyone else. For an Echo Element sniper, it was basic trigonometry. She exhaled softly, pausing naturally at the bottom of her breath, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed pistol coughed, thwip, thwip, a double tap that sounded like a heavy staple gun. The 5.7mm rounds punched cleanly through the drywall, throwing a puff of white dust into the dark room. In the hallway, Luca crumpled instantly. The armor-piercing rounds caught him exactly where Abigail had calculated, precisely under the jawline, severing the brainstem. He hit the floor like a sack of wet cement, his finger spasming and sending a single stray bullet into the ceiling, shattering a fluorescent bulb. Glass rained down into the hallway. Back in the lobby, the sound of the shattered bulb echoed like a gunshot. Victor spun toward the hallway, his submachine gun raised. "Luca, report!" Victor yelled into his comms. Static. Victor's eyes darted around the lobby. Dr. Wright was groaning on the floor, clutching his bleeding face. The receptionist was weeping hysterically. Brenda was frozen in terror, her hands covering her mouth. "Anton!" Victor hissed to his remaining man. "Hold the door. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out." Victor marched over to Brenda, grabbing her by the collar of her scrubs and hauling her to her feet with brutal force. He pressed the barrel of his APC-9 under her chin. "Who else is in this building?" He roared, the veneer of the professional hitman cracking into raw panic. "Who is back there?" Nobody." Brenda sobbed, terrified out of her mind. "I swear it's just the doctor, the receptionist, and me, and Abigail." "Who the hell is Abigail?" "The triage nurse. She's just a nurse. She's terrified of her own shadow, I swear to God." Victor stared down the dark hallway. 2 of his best men, highly trained operatives who had survived wet-work operations from Grozny to Bogota, had vanished into the silence in less than 3 minutes. This wasn't the work of a terrified triage nurse. This was a systematic dismantling by an apex predator. "Anton, we are leaving," Victor said, his voice dropping to a lethal register. "But first we finish the job. Bring the doctor. We use them as shields. We clear the hallway breach, the room, kill Miller, and we walk out." Anton grabbed Dr. Wright by the collar, dragging the disoriented physician to his feet. Using Brenda and Dr. Wright as human shields, Victor and Anton began to back slowly down the hallway, their weapons trained on the shadows. Abigail watched the terrifying procession through the convex mirror at the end of the hall. Her heart rate remained flat, her emotions completely compartmentalized. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Victor was smart. By using Brenda and Doctor Wright as cover, he had effectively neutralized her angles. The 5-7 could punch through the human shields and hit the tangos behind them, but the collateral damage was unacceptable. She was a protector now, not just an executioner. She needed to alter the environment. She needed chaos. Abigail silently retreated back down the hallway toward the clinic's electrical room. It was a heavy metal door, right next to exam room 2. She opened the breaker box, found the main switch and yanked it down. The clinic plunged into total darkness. A split second later, the backup generators kicked in, bathing the corridors in a dim, blood-red emergency light. The sudden shift in visibility caused Victor and Anton to freeze. "Night vision," Victor barked. As Anton reached up with one hand to pull down the monocle strapped to his helmet, Abigail made her move. She didn't attack Anton. Instead, she grabbed a heavy stainless steel IV pole from a nearby supply cart and hurled it horizontally down the corridor, straight at the clinic's large glass pharmacy window. Crash! The deafening sound of shattering glass in the enclosed space was catastrophic. Anton, highly trained, but completely high-strung, reflexively swung his pistol toward the noise, stepping out from behind Dr. Wright for a fraction of a second to acquire the target. It was all the time Abigail needed. Leaning out from the darkness, she fired a single round. The bullet struck Anton perfectly in the side of his skull, bypassing his Kevlar helmet. He collapsed his finger off the trigger, sparing the doctor. Dr. Wright scrambled to the floor, crawling frantically away from the crossfire. "Damn it!" Victor roared. He shoved Brenda violently to the ground and spun toward exam room 2. He wasn't trying to escape anymore. He was going to complete the mission at all costs. He kicked the door of exam room 2 with a massive booted foot. The flimsy wooden frame splintered, and the door flew open. Inside, David Miller was cowering behind the examination table, clutching a scalpel with trembling hands. Victor raised his submachine gun, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his scarred face. "David, you thought you could run from the Bratva. You thought the Americans could hide you." Before Victor could pull the trigger, Abigail's voice, cold, steady, and utterly devoid of its usual timid stutter, echoed from the red-lit hallway. "Drop the weapon, Victor." Victor froze, keeping his gun trained on Miller, but slowly turned his head to look back into the corridor. Abigail stepped out of the shadows. The 5.7 leveled perfectly at the center of Victor's face. In the red light, she looked like a different person. The oversized scrubs seemed to hang differently on her frame, emphasizing the lethal, squared-off combat stance she had assumed. Victor stared at her, his eyes narrowing as he processed the way she held the weapon, the lack of fear in her eyes, the cold, dead calm radiating from her. "You." Victor breathed recognition dawning on him. The pieces clicked into place. The suppressed double taps, the ghosting. "We didn't just find the accountant." He let out a dark, raspy chuckle. "Miller was just the bait. My employers. They tracked the Phantom of Damascus. Echo element." "You talk too much," Abigail said softly. "I have body armor, little nurse." Victor sneered, adjusting his grip on the APC-9. "You have a pistol. You pull that trigger, I squeeze mine. I might die, but I cut you and the accountant in half." "Level 3 Kevlar," Abigail stated analytically, not moving an inch. "Rated for 9mm and .44 Magnum. But I'm holding a weapon chambered in 5.7 by 28mm. SS-190 armor-piercing rounds. At this range, your vest is tissue paper. And I'm not aiming for your chest." Victor hesitated. In that microsecond of doubt, he made the calculation to swing his weapon toward her. But Abigail didn't fire. She knew she couldn't risk the burst of submachine gun fire hitting Brenda, who was sobbing on the floor between them. Instead, Abigail did something completely unpredictable. She dropped into a slide, moving with terrifying speed beneath Victor's line of sight, kicking the door of exam room 1 open and throwing herself inside. A burst of 9mm rounds chewed through the drywall where she had just been standing. "Coward!" Victor screamed, stepping back into the hallway, leaving Miller for a moment to hunt his real prize. "You think you can hide from me?" Abigail wasn't hiding. She was moving to her firing point. Exam Room 1 shared an exterior wall with the clinic's front landscaping, featuring a massive reinforced glass window that looked out toward the street and the idling black Suburban. She knew the geometry of the building. She knew that if she stood at the far corner of this room, she had a clear diagonal line of sight straight through the window, across the courtyard through the clinic's glass front doors, and directly down the main hallway. She backed herself into the corner of the room, pressing her shoulder against the wall to stabilize herself. It was the pistol equivalent of a sniper's sandbag rest. She looked through the layers of glass. 40 yards away, Victor was creeping down the hallway, searching the doorways, completely unaware that he had walked into a fatal funnel. To him, Abigail was trapped in a room. To Abigail, he was perfectly framed in her crosshairs. But there was a problem. She had to shoot through the clinic's heavy exterior window and the reinforced glass of the lobby doors. The deflection of the bullet would be significant. She closed her eyes for a millisecond. She remembered the wind of the Hindu Kush, the atmospheric pressure of the desert, the complex math of a 1,200-yard shot. A 40-yard shot through glass was child's play for a Tier 1 sniper. She opened her eyes. She calculated the angle of incidence on the glass. She aimed 2 inches to the right of Victor's ear, accounting for the drift. She drew in a slow breath, held it. Crack. The 5.7 fired. The bullet shattered the window of Exam Room 1, zipped across the rainy courtyard, punched through the glass lobby doors, and struck Victor squarely in the temple, dropping him instantly before he even heard the glass break. His body hit the linoleum with a heavy thud, his submachine gun clattering uselessly across the floor. Dead silence fell over the clinic, save for the hum of the backup generators. But Abigail wasn't done. Through the broken window, she saw the brake lights of the black Suburban flare. The driver, the 5th man, had heard the shot and seen the glass shatter. He knew the mission was a catastrophic failure. The heavy SUV's engine roared as the driver slammed the vehicle into gear, turning the steering wheel sharply. He wasn't fleeing. He was aiming the massive 3-ton vehicle directly at the broken window of Exam Room 1, intending to crush whoever was inside. The Suburban jumped the curb, tearing through the wet landscaping, its heavy tires churning mud and grass into the air, accelerating straight toward Abigail. Most people would have run. Abigail stepped forward into the shattered frame of the window, the rain immediately soaking her scrubs and plastering her hair to her face. She raised the pistol with both hands, taking a rigid isosceles stance. She didn't aim at the driver. She aimed at the engine block, specifically visualizing the path to the driver's side steering column and the structural weakness of the windshield glass. Thwip, thwip, thwip. She fired 3 rapid shots. The first round shattered the windshield, compromising its integrity. The second round punched right through the spiderwebbed glass, striking the driver squarely in the chest. The third round caught him in the shoulder as he slumped over the wheel. The massive vehicle violently veered off course, scraping against the brick exterior of the clinic in a shower of sparks before slamming heavily into a concrete structural pillar. The airbags deployed with a muted pop, and the horn began to blare continuously into the rainy afternoon. Abigail slowly lowered the weapon. Her breathing was steady. Her hands were perfectly still. Behind her, the timid, trembling voice of Brenda echoed from the hallway. Abby, are they gone?" Abigail looked down at the gun in her hand, then out at the smoking wreckage in the rain. Her cover was blown. The Bratva knew where she was, and soon the authorities would be asking questions about a triage nurse who fought like a JSOC operator. The quiet life in Oak Creek was over. She popped the magazine out of the pistol, cleared the chamber, and placed the weapon gently on a nearby medical tray. "They're gone, Brenda." Abigail said, her voice soft, steady, and commanding. "Call 911. Tell them David Miller is safe." Before the distant wail of police sirens could reach the clinic, Abigail stepped out through the broken window, fading seamlessly into the pouring rain, leaving the timid nurse behind forever. If you felt your pulse pounding through every twist and tactical maneuver of Abigail's explosive true story, don't leave just yet. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with anyone who loves a high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled thriller, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the hidden world of elite survival.